Hello and welcome to another Death Knight guide video. I am Andromeda here, helping you to break down Unholy DK so you can finally start pulling the big numbers that you see other DKs pulling and be able to meet the DPS checks and rates or Mythic Plus that need to be hit. I'm 5 out of 9 Mythic at the posting of this video and have numerous 90% parses in LFR, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic TOS. Hopefully after watching this video you'll be able to start getting your numbers up there, be able to start making your checks, and ultimately start benefiting your raid group a little bit more. I hope by watching this video you learn a little bit, and if you do learn something, feel free to subscribe and hit the like. Let's go ahead and get started with gearing. Before we begin, you should download two very important add-ons, the SimCraft add-on and Pawn. We're going to go ahead and simulate our characters on raidbots.com to generate pawn strings for item upgrades. The way this works is it takes into account the stats you already have and what your target weight should be. After you have the pawn string on your character, you'll be able to very quickly see on items if the item is an upgrade or not. This takes the guesswork out of knowing what you need and what you don't need, and makes the determination on if a piece of gear that drops is an upgrade or not, and whether or not you should be wearing it. Playing in Unholy DK, we have a few target stats to hit while juggling our 4 set. Ideally, you should have your shoulders and your chest to be doing the most amount of damage possible. However, if you don't have those legendaries, don't worry. This guide is more or less intended for people who do already have those shoulders and the chest, or if you're like me, have at least one of those. Your stats should be sitting around 20% haste and 20% crit. Those are the numbers that I'm roughly around. 21% haste, 26% crit, and around 80% mastery. You will somewhat juggle between these. At some points you may have higher haste, you may have higher crit, but at no time should you have more stats in either of those than you do mastery. And your mastery should not dip any lower than realistically 70%. This combination of stats lets me sit anywhere between a sustained amount of 1.4 to 1.8 million DPS on most fights, and around 1.8 to 2.5 billion on burst. Keep in mind I don't have my BIS shoulders, and I would be substantially higher with them. However, without them I am still getting 90% parses, so don't let the fact that you don't have your shoulders or your chest hinder your DPS. As a general rule, once you've simmed your character and have your stat weights, follow Pawn. Talking talents here, we have a couple different options in terms of sustainability, defensives. Primarily though, you want to be using Ebb and Fever because it causes our dots to be doing more damage in less time. If you have the legendary ring that gives you the passive Soul of the Death Lord, you'll also get Bursting Spores. That is a situational AoE on some fights that is good, say like on Desolate Host with Defile. We're going to stick with pretty much the cookie cutter builds here and assume that you are not using Soul of the Death Lord. And if you are, oh well, you're going to be using Ebb and Fever anyways. Your next option is going to be Pestilent Pustules. Basically, for every 8 festering wounds you burst, you gain an additional rune, which really adds up over a fight. Unholy Frenzy, you can use Clawing Shadows on fights where you need a little bit more range, a little bit more, like on Desolate Host, for example, and Mythic. This is a very good option to use. Castigator, it's situational at best. You're probably not going to get very consistent damage gains out of it. Unholy Frenzy, however, is going to provide you consistent attack damage and attack speed. Not necessarily so much damage, but you do more damage with the additional attack speed. Sludge Belcher here is really the only additional option that would be viable here. Your Sludge Belcher does more damage, and when you do Dark Transformation, you get more AoE damage out of the ghoul. Asphyxiate is more of a situational thing. In Outbreak, you can't slow down bosses in PvE, so it's really not a usable ability. I prefer Spell Eater personally on fights, say like Goroth, where your shield's going to get broken, or on Sisters where you can hit a glaive and not die. Stuff like that that allows you to take a little bit more. Corpse Shield is also a very good option. It's a very viable defensive. Or if you have a fight with a lot of mobility that needs done, like Kill Jaden or anything like that, you can use Lingering Apparition. Basically lets you move faster, but I do prefer Spell Eater. Shadow Infusion here is going to be your best option in most fights, generally speaking, because you'll be able to keep your Dark Transformation up. And on fights like Mistress or anything like that, it's an extremely good option because your ghoul will do so much damage when it's transformed. And in terms of single target right now, Dark Arbiter is the #1 single target spell. As the video is being made in Taurus, this may change, and we might need to have more sims come out. But for now, Dark Arbiter is going to be your best for single target. Defile on fights like Mistress or like on Desolate Host, where there's a lot of ads coming out, Defile's an extremely good ability to use as well for multiple targets. Looking at Netherlight Crucible and Relics is another important part of the gearing process. On Relics you want to be targeting Plague Bearer, which basically increases our virulent plague damage by a substantial amount. And on secondary traits on the Relics you should be looking for either Shadowbind or Torment of the Weak. Both of those do an incredible amount of damage. For me, all 3 of my relics have Shadowbind, so fortunately I've been given 3 extremely good relics. And with 3 of these, the relics themselves increase my total DPS output between 50 to 70k DPS on an average boss fight, which over the span of a fight for just additional points is really strong. And then basically on your 3rd traits, you're looking for Plague Bearer, which again is dot damage, or the Darkest Crusade. If you are unlucky and you don't get either of those, as those are your best, your next 3rd option is Deadliest Coil, which is still a decent chunk of damage, especially considering Death Coil is typically going to be one of your top 4 abilities on the fights. And ideally, when you open these up, your traits, it should be lined up in a way that you can just go straight down the path. So on my first relic, for example, Shadowbind, I just go straight down to Plague Bearer. None of these other options were really great for me. The same thing here. I'm only trait 70 on my weapon, so I don't have all 3 traits unlocked. And if you do, congratulations, I just don't have that much time. But Shadowbind, and again, fortunately, I have the Darkest Crusade, so this is a best relic for me. And then on my Legendaries, it's Shadowbind and then really, really poor secondaries, or 3rd tier traits. If I were to go this route on the right side, Eternal Agony is not really the strongest trait, so I just went Shadowbind and chose to take the overall DPS increase of not getting Eternal Agony over the defensive traits that these provide. You should be focusing down secondary traits. 3rd tier traits are not really worth going over until later on when you can actually unlock the 3rd tier, and the 2nd tier matters with the 3rd tier. So just keep that in mind as you pick. Only start looking at 2nd tier traits for now as you're just getting into relics, and then eventually work on min-maxing like I have on some of my relics here. Once we have our gear in order and we make sure that everything is set for us to go ahead and start fighting bosses, once we have equipped our best gear from using our pawn strings and our simcraft and our raid bot simulation, basically we just need to get into how are we going to use our opener, what buttons do we use, all that stuff. Because I don't have shoulders and the fact that I use Cold Heart and I have a Spectre Betrayal, I also do have a trinket to use at the same time simultaneously, so we'll also show how that works with the GCDs. But basically your opener is going to consist of an Army of the Dead at 6 seconds on pull timer. At 1 second you're going to put your Sludge Belcher into Dark Transformation. When coming up to the boss, you're going to use Chains of Ice first, and then you're going to use your trinket. That way you do it all in the same GCD, whereas if you use the trinket and then Chains of Ice, you're going to go ahead and trigger a GCD, which puts you just about a second and a half. It's not a second and a half, but it really slows you down due to having to use multiple GCDs, whereas before only using it on one GCD, now you have to do it on like 3 GCDs to get your rotation off. You're going to use Outbreak on your target. Make sure we do not let it throw off throughout the fight. That's a huge chunk of your damage. Generate 6 stacks of Festering Wound, Apocalypse, which is your weapon, and then you're going to summon your Dark Arbiter, and you're going to dump Runic Power to complete your burst. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 6-second pull. There's no potions, there's no flasks, there's nothing like that used. We are going to go ahead and do a DBM pull 6. We're going to start summoning our ghouls right away. We're going to put our ghoul in Dark Transformation, make sure we poison him. Chains of Ice at the same time we use our trinket, get up to about 6 stacks. Use our weapon, summon our Dark Valkyrie, we pop some damage into our target using Death Coil to go ahead and empower our Valkyrie a little bit. Dump Runic Power again, make sure we reapply our dots. Make sure we dump all our Runic Power, and then you basically just begin your normal rotation. All the while your Valkyrie's up, you're using cooldowns or not cooldowns, but you're using your Runic Power to empower your Valkyrie. And by the time your Valkyrie disappears, you're at about 2.28 million burst. Your ghouls start dying, your damage is going to go ahead and float for a little bit. And for approximately the first 20 seconds of the fight, you're already sitting at about 2 million DPS. So this is a pretty standard burst, and then you basically just transition into fighting the rest of the boss. At this point, you're just focused on primarily keeping your dot up, making sure that you have all of your stacks up and are dumping and using your runic power, especially when you get the sudden doom procs. You get the coils, and that's pretty much it. I mean, just making sure you don't rune starve yourself by using too many festering strikes. Make sure that you're using all of your Scourge Strike on the festering wounds, using those smartly, and then basically by the time everything comes up, you're pretty much going to be sitting at around, on average, between 1.4 to 1.6 million with a similar item level. You should be able to sustain this for the most part throughout most of the fight. There should be no issues sustaining this on the majority of the fight here. The only other useful bit of information that I would throw in is to get WeakAuras. Like you saw in the previous clip, I had like a blue Chains of Ice icon in the middle of my screen that said 20. And the reason for that is because Cold Heart, if you read the text on it, basically stacks up to 20 times. And if you're not looking out throughout the fight, you're not going to be really paying attention to where the stacks are at. And so I just use it to track my damage. WeakAuras, you can get a lot of things, such as, like, I have a cooldown tracker for like raids, so I use DBM, and I also have an external CD tracker, which is this right here, so I can see what my teammates are doing. I have the Chains caster, and then when I'm running my speed set, or I have like an engine of eradication, I can also track the timer on it, and then also your Hydra shot. So there's a lot of useful things. You can also go ahead and get them. It's a Wago, WAGO.io. You can get more WeakAuras strings to help you track more things. But if you like this and you think it helped, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll definitely see you in the next one.